Professor Swaran Singh, a lot of people say that Donald Trump is treating this resettlement as a real estate development, and this resettlement is without any political voice or legitimacy, because without political resettlement, how can you have a sort of a real, the sort of the redevelopment which he is talking about? And secondly, as Ambassador Dayal said, that it's a vanity project, but this vanity project intends to dismantle United Nations. Is that correct?
That's quintessentially Donald Trump. If you read the charter that he has just enunciated, the very opening line talks about need for courage to depart from approaches and institutions that have very often failed. It's an aspersion on United Nations very clearly. And of course, charter makes him look like the supreme leader because chairman decides everything and can veto everyone else and so on. It's an interesting document to read. But what is interesting here is, despite his dissatisfaction or disaffection with India, he has invited India, which I think is a recognition of India's stature at international level, but particularly when it comes to matters Middle East. Even President Joe Biden had ensured that India was in I2U2 kind of quad that he had built between Israel, UAE, United States, and India was part of it. So India's recognition is underlined. Second, when India is taking its own time, we are studying as officially it is told. There are the majority of countries, out of 60 countries that are supposed to potentially be so-called quote-unquote invited by the chairman. About 19 at best is the highest number that we know that have kind of responded so far. But what is interesting is that none of the major countries have responded so far. None of the G7 and none of the permanent 5 of UN Security Council except United States, which is proposing this whole vanity project in this case. So it's perfectly fine. India is on the right side, as most nations are taking their own time. But when it comes to India, I think India is very careful in terms of strategic caution, given its very significant, unusual, unique relationship with Middle East countries. I always underline how India is friend of Israel, but also friend of Iran, friend of Saudi Arabia, but also friend of UAE, friend of Egypt, and so on. In that kind of holistic, very, very interesting relationship across the region, India is already organizing the second Arab League foreign ministers meeting in Delhi. India is hosting on 30th and 31st January. And I think that will be an occasion to do consultations, which is required. You must consult regional stakeholders before India decides as to how it wants to respond. Then, of course, there are issues in principle of India's discomfort with anything that is trying to skirt United Nations. And in this case, of course, Charter is undermining United Nations in that sense. So India doesn't want initiatives outside United Nations, particularly leader-centric, individual-centric initiatives of this nature, where, as you underlined in the beginning, there is a fee to buy your permanent seat. I think that is something which must have inspired Donald Trump from Elon Musk. Twitter used to give you blue tick once you establish your credentials, until he came and said you can pay the fee and get the blue tick. But even Elon Musk at Davos was laughing away on board of peace, saying, is it PIECE? That means a piece of Gaza, a piece of Venezuela, or a piece of Greenland. And what kind of board is that? So even his close allies are not sure as to what is this initiative is meant to ultimately lead to. But yes, some countries have agreed upon it. Some of these countries had their representative standings there. So if you allow me, I think in terms of optics, also India not being in that group of leaders was, I think, very calculated way of doing it, because India didn't want to see any of senior ministers standing next to Pakistani Prime Minister who is endorsing whatever President Trump wants to see. So in multiple ways, I think it's a very calculated decision to take time, consult regional leaders, see how international community, major powers, middle powers are responding to this board of peace, and then take a call, because enormous investment of personal efforts of Prime Minister, who has visited Middle East so many times. He was in December only in Jordan and Oman. and the overall connect that India historically has had with most of these countries. India will take time, will consult these other regional leaders, international stakeholders, and so on. And I'm sure that President Trump is by now used to India taking its own time. So he's not kind of too worried about India jumping the boat immediately, jumping onto the boat. India will take time, and I think that is how India wants to focus on long-term interests and how this institution
Okay.
is understood and how it is to be taken forward. Because right now it seems Donald Trump centric individually. It even mentions the chairman will be the President Donald J. Trump. He will anoint a successor, and even when he is removed by unanimous voting, which is impossible, immediately his anointed successor will take over. Charter is a very interesting document to read. It is written, Donald Trump is written all over it.
But Ambassador,